Hi, welcome to another rant. Certainly, here in the UK, it was sad Saturday for a couple of regressive right wing movements. Rouge V's Return of the Kings became the ultimate rout, with all the events cancelled. To add to Mr. V's woes, the media were able to track him down to where he really lives. Surprise, surprise, in the basement of his mum's house. Apparently, the poor lamb had been threatened by angry women and was laying low. Now Mr. V is playing the victim card. Just another whining creep, really, who can dish it out and just can't take it. On a slightly less farcical note, the much heralded PEGIDA UK march in Birmingham turned out to be top of the flops. About 200 rain-sodden patriots shuffled through a deserted non-residential area. The soggy collection was far removed from the well-attended scenario Tommy Robinson had confidently predicted. Despite this ignominious launch, he is predicting they will be able to mobilise 100,000 people on the streets by the beginning of next year. Seems highly unlikely from any perspective. Also, the previous week in Dover, an anti-migrant march had about 150 knuckle-dragging hardcore Nazis present. It's all a far cry from when the far right could muster 1,000 plus in the 1970s and, in certain areas, be greeted like an army of liberation, albeit accompanied by an equal number of police. The far right mostly prospers when there's a Labour Party administration. Apart from the brief flourishing of the EDL, this really does seem to fit the rule. The powers that be don't really need at this moment these people to fulfil a divide and rule agenda. And UKIP is not a street movement. It just hoovers up millions of protest votes to no real effect, apart from driving the main parties further to the right. After all, there's Prime Minister Cameron spouting migrant bashing speeches on a weekly basis. Just take a glance also at the headlines of the Daily Hate Mail and the Sun and other so-called newspapers. This is not to say, by any stretch of the imagination, that PEGIDA or the master race should be unchallenged on the streets. Far from it. After all, the streets are our main forum, and the far right represent just about everything us anarchists and like-minded people find repulsive. Nationalism, racism, deference to authority, the monarchy, the armed forces and the so-called superior classes. So, we'll hit the streets whenever they do, whatever the costs. We say to those numerically significant elements of the working class, in particular the disenfranchised, dissatisfied, malcontented, combative, and just plain angry, there's plenty to be mobilising about on the streets and beyond. The housing crisis affects millions of us and is growing. All the government has to offer is weasel words about affordable housing and right to buy loans. In reality, the only building boom here in London are tens of thousands of £1 million apartments, many of which will remain empty, purchased by the world's rich as investments. Meanwhile, increasing numbers sleeping rough on the pavements and in doorways. Hundreds of thousands await in vain for a rapidly shrinking number of social housing units. Now, a substantial number of middle-class professionals are unable to gain a toehold on the lowest rung of the so-called housing market, paying half or more of their income to parasite landlords. This crisis manifests itself everywhere. Jobs, low incomes, education, health, quality of life. For many, it's a case of merely scraping by with no foreseeable future. Rather than wallow in helpless despair and frustration, blaming all the wrong people, from migrants to Muslims to the undeserving poor, our anger should be directed to overturning the entire system, right through to Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. Everybody is aware to some degree that the system ain't fit for purpose, is incapable of any meaningful change. Yet we allow it to continue, to our detriment, and sadly to our shame. All we've had so far is a revolution of the rich against the poor. Do we really want a future with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister and Donald Trump as President. What we've got is nightmare enough, with plenty more to come. Things can only get worse, unless we all do something about it, and the sooner the better. Bye.